Welcome to the So What Talk Show. I would like to welcome our special guest, Dietrich Borchardt, and we just saw a lovely presentation by you. And we have some other guests in our round today, Myriam, Roman, Heide, and Jens. And we would like to know more about the process you have been running with the roundtable. This was a very complicated process with a lot of roundtable meetings, with a lot of expert opinions. Would you say such a process is an exception or is an example for such processes? Are they regular practice? Are they common practice, or are they still an exception?
I think we will see more of these processes in the future because, and of course we see these as new ways to cope with major problems. It's not only an environmental issue. If you take large infrastructures, for example, as an example, Stuttgart 21 has been one example. We see now the debate about the energy change of the connecting the wind power, the wind parks in the North Sea with these large infrastructures to the country. I would say it is, and we will see, of course, and one point is very important. If you take Stuttgart 21 as an example, nowadays you cannot be sure when there's a project which is fully adopted by planning, it has been fully planned, there has to be a legal implementation, but then you have to realize that you cannot simply realize such a project against public resistance. And we see this in many other areas. Those mining is another one, the energy sector is another one, and I'm convinced that we will see such problems and such problem constellations, I would say, in the future much more often.
So, a very encompassing process, but a necessary one with growing public awareness through the new media, etc. What would you say was the most critical step in the process? What was the major bottleneck that you had to overcome where you were afraid the process might fail?
I think the most critical part was I would say there were, it's not only one, there are maybe two or three really critical bottlenecks. One is the creation of such a roundtable. So what are the interests which are there, and are they really accepted, are the really conflicting parties incorporated when you have only 25 seats, but you have thousands of interests, so the mandate there is a really sensitive part. And then, of course, you need the, and then there's a criteria which is linked. So the people who are there, they need to have a clear mandate, and they have to fulfill this mandate, and it has to be done, and they must be interested in the solution. If they are only there and if they are not really interested to find a solution and are not open for new pathways, and regardless if it is an environmental activist or it's the industry, they have to be reliable in that sense. And this is a really critical part. And then the rest is a lot of work, but somehow manageable.
All right. Mm-hmm. 3 no votes. Has the industry tried to bribe you to...
No. I think
attack your integrity?
I think their no is has one major reason, because they have the stakeholders, and if they are not really forced by legal power to, and we are talking about investments of several hundred million of euros, so 400 million in the first part for the technical, and another 400 million euros for the long distance disposal. These are significant investments, and if you take the stakeholders they have, they will ask them, are you really forced to do that? And therefore they cannot really give such significant commitments in advance. They have to be enforced somehow, and this is one reason for their no.
All right.
But as you see, they are implementing that because they have no alternative.
Good, thank you. Let's allow some questions from our other guests. Who would like to ask a question to Dietrich? Hi.
Okay, I mean, it's going a bit in your direction how this roundtable and the mandates were chosen. So, was there a stakeholder analysis, or how do you really decide if you just have 25 people allowed in this roundtable? I mean, are you asking them who would like to participate? How do you look and see?
It's an important point that you are raising, because there has a time, or there has been a period before the roundtable was implemented. And as you said, there has been a stakeholder analysis, this was done. And then there was a half a year of debate with all the, so we had the first proposal for the organization of the roundtable, but then of course it needs a lot of discussion. Do you accept this, or do you see that? Who has really to be there, who must be there, who is somebody who's maybe a little bit, it's nice to have, but not really necessary. And then, of course, I take the example of the environmental activists or the environmental groups, there were in total, I think, 30 who announced interest to be and to work at the round table. We had only one place. And then we organized, we had to communicate that, and then what was very interesting to see that they really found together, and then they identified somebody and organized the mandate for this one seat in a separate process, and this worked quite well.
Myriam.
I want to challenge a bit the method of a round table. So, from a scientific point of view, do you think that this democratic process of a round table wastes more time than it solves the problem? So you need how many months or years to get a solution for your problem with the weather? And along this time, the environment
finding
is
the stakeholders.
My answer is quite simple. It was not possible to find a solution for more than 100 years. So 2 years are not very much in relation to that. So, and what is very clear when we're talking about the future, there will be in a minimum more than 60 to 70 years of active production. So it's 2 years in relation to a further production period of 60 years. And then there are these salt mountains, which will be there for hundreds of years, and they produce wastewater because the rain is falling down. It creates salt water, which is polluting the river systems for hundreds of years. And again, taking 2 years against the perspective of this pollution we will have there, I think is absolutely...
You wouldn't do such a process for a minor problem, only for major problems.
Yeah,
okay. Roman, what about...
When you define the participants for the round table, I guess you didn't know who's gonna block all the decisions that will be made. So did you have any measures to figure it out in advance, or was it just a good...
Bribing the participants of the round table before it even starts?
You raised a very important point, and it's also, I would say, it's some kind of soft skill that you need. The best way to do that is to create a group pressure. So we knew 2/3 of the people we knew somehow, including their positions, but also the way how they are acting. And we were quite sure that if you have a 2/3 majority, which creates a certain group identity, but also a certain group pressure, then it's much harder for individual opposites to take over such a role. And this was our strategy, and it worked quite well.
Okay. Yes, what is your question to Dietrich?
So I have a question to the scientists. In your presentation, they appear as evidence-driven, so they present knowledge. How can you guarantee this, that they are not unbiased? When they are unbiased?
What we did was that we identified, or what we did always is we made proposals for the scientific knowledge that is needed. So what we did was when such a meeting started, we say, okay, we need this knowledge to answer that. This question is there, we need that knowledge. The question is there, we need that knowledge. Do you agree? Yes, we do. So if you agree, then it means that we need expertise working on these points. Do you agree? Yes, I agree. So then we need somebody who is doing that. And then what we did is we made open proposals. We asked people to apply. Typically we had 5 to 6 to 7 proposals from different scientific groups who wanted to elaborate this proposal. And then we again made this an open decision process. And then at the end, we made a proposal who, from our opinion, the best scientist and could really do the job. But at the end, the vote was always the vote of the roundtable. So we made the proposal, but at the end, all the decisions were made by the roundtable. And then we proceeded with this process. So it was this strategy to have them also, to make them responsible for also selecting the scientific expertise, and this worked this was a quite good idea, I think.
Let's change a little bit the subject. You will have another chance. All the audience watching this talk show today are here also to learn about science communication. What would you say, was there a major communication obstacle? Where did you see the major communication bottlenecks within the roundtable?
From my side.
Yes, was there any difficulties of, we've been talking about uncertainties, about scenarios. You were saying you need scenarios. Do people understand actually what a scenario is? The uncertainties connected with it, the probabilities that are attached to a scenario. Were there any obstacles regarding that? Communicating scientific results and scenarios?
Might sound simple, but I think this was really the simple part. Okay. This, when we talk about communication, and you do it the way I described for the selection of this knowledge, then of course we also had to get back, and we sometimes had to translate the results again that in a way that the roundtable members could understand it. The much more complicated part was the communication to the outside, to the public, because the public perception of what the roundtable is doing. Of course, there were some people who say, okay, interesting project, and others say, and that promised the roundtable will fail. So this was, and they had, of course, and we also had people from the outside who were not part of the roundtable. Then they become more and more active to.
They were very critical trying to interrupt the process.
Yes, of course, and therefore.
How did you overcome that?
We did not really overcome this problem, but what we made then a very active public relations work, and we had professional people working on public relations, and this is definitely our limit. That also for me personally, I think this is definitely my limit. I cannot think and write in an appropriate way when it comes to press releases.
So you need the knowledge broker that transfers the scientific knowledge into public understanding. Okay, definitely. More questions from the round. Heide.
Well, it was actually whether scenario planning is a good method or not, but it's already answered, so I'm fine for the moment.
Okay. More questions?
So you implemented a public relations guide for the round table, or did all the parties should implement a guide for the public relations?
We had a guy there who did that, and a professional one. Mm-hmm.
Because I guess the industry had their own guide.
They had their own, and they run their own public relations work, which was different from the one the roundtable had. But this helped us because it could show the controversy, and it make also other groups who are there did also their own press releases and things like this. But there was also the one from the roundtable, and this was then. I think now we have. I think there are now 600 to 700 press reports and releases about this process, and this nicely shows the controversy. But the press releases of the roundtable were always in the middle, and they were really taken as a reference point, where you can nicely arrange all the other opinions around. one sentence to the scenarios. I think they worked really well. And what is again very important, there were some people who had the opinion we as a scientists or the roundtable will work towards one solution, or they will identify, the white rabbit jumping out of the hat. And we could show them very early that this is not the way we were working. But such a problem, as I said also in the presentation, always has alternatives. And there's, for no environmental problem, including green energy, there's one optimum or one perfect solutions. There will always be alternatives with pros and cons. And this is what we have to make transparent. And then they have to understand what their decision means and what are the pros they win, but what are also the cons that they have to accept. And this is exactly what the core of the business is, to show that.
Okay. Myriam.
Yeah, so considering the good scientific practice, do you think that the scientists involved in such roundtables should have an opinion, or do they just answer based on facts?
They must have an opinion,
yeah.
But they have to be very clear, when do I talk about facts and when do I talk about my opinion. And when they are asked as experts in their field, they should restrict their communication to the facts. If they are asked for their opinions, then of course they have to announce their opinion, but they should not mix it. And then it becomes dangerous. And the same is with it's always the same, I think, if you talk about public relations, if you talk with a guy from a newspaper or from broadcasting, like here, it should always be clear, if you see a report also on TV, what is a fact and what is the opinion. And nowadays it is often mixed, even in higher level presentation, and this is a danger. And my recommendation is to be clear and authentic, so that somebody who listens to you can identify, is he talking about facts or is he talking about his opinion. And this has to be very clear. And as I said, you must have an opinion. To have no opinion is not really convincing.
More questions from the round?
In your presentation you mentioned about the problem of becoming lucky of the industry. Did you, during your experiences in roundtables, did you ever have the feeling of, from this point on, I'm endangered to become a lucky of the industry?
I would say maybe it sounds a little bit provocative, but when working with Exxon, it was one of the most independent scientific work I experienced. When working with, sometimes with authorities, there was much more pressure also from the political part, and you cannot be sure that a public-driven process is really independent. But what is very clear, that all the relations again have to be transparent. So in the Exxon process, for example, we generated a contract with some preconditions, and also with the exit conditions. One exit condition, for example, is if they promise us to give us all data, provide us all data that we need, and later on they do not because they say it's our business secret, then it must be an exit criterion. And we made this again transparent and clearly said from before we started what are the exit criteria, and then and of course industries are very different. Exxon is really a very modern, in this sense a very modern industry. K+S is somehow from the last century in some respect. We're talking about the internal process. Yeah.
The whole process was a very solution-oriented process. How would you achieve the goals of the Water Framework Directive? However, did you come across any major unknowns? Were there any research questions that developed from the process that still need to be addressed?
Not very much with the roundtable, surprisingly, as we see. Now there is some ecotoxicological work going on and so on. But we now have a major outcome from the exxon process, because there we identified major knowledge gaps that for the moment mean that we don't have enough science base to decide if this really is an energy option for the future or not. And the result of that was we made a proposal how the science gaps can be closed, and this is essentially what is going on now, that BMBF, the research organization BMU, that we had a joint workshop in January, and they picked up our recommendation now to set up a research program which will take 5 years or so, and that really the knowledge gaps will now be, and the conclusion was that the knowledge gaps and the new risk dimensions are too high to give a recommendation, and therefore we ended up with a major part of the recommendation, which ends up in a targeted research.
Great. So, as we were also speaking about research planning today, and we'll be speaking about this tomorrow, would you see this as a valuable process maybe also to achieve implementation of what we have for the Water Science Alliance, the major research challenges, to establish such roundtables with more specific research questions that could be funded by BMBF within the frame of the priority research fields of the Water Science Alliance?
I think so. I'm convinced that this is a good idea, because we also have now some experience how these roundtables work, and let me state one point which is especially relevant from my perspective for environmental research. Because sometimes there is a separation between fundamental research, knowledge-driven research, and problem-oriented research, and which is bad and which is good science. I think these and such initiatives can really help to identify relevant fields of problem-driven research which need excellent science. And if this comes together, then I think it's what we need. And I think it is also the role of, again, science and society. Should a scientist identify which are the relevant questions? I think he should not do this alone. But and then again, society should make use of science, but also take their responsibility to be part of the identification of the relevant research questions. And now the energy strategy is one aspect of that, an important one.
All right. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll take this, unless there are urgent questions that you would like to pose. I will take this as a closing remark, and thank you very much for being part of our So What talk show.